let's dive right into it with that Thursday night football game. We thought it was going to be a runaway game with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We weren't sure coming into it. Was Trevor Lawrence going to be okay on that knee? Was that knee, like, was it a little bit of misdirection with Doug Peterson kind of keeping it at the hip with Trevor Lawrence trying to maybe confuse the Saints? Maybe they were planning for CJ Beathard, and then Trevor Lawrence ends up leading the Jaguars in rushing yards at the beginning of the half. He's the perfect quarterback because he is fine just standing in the pocket, dicing you up all game, moving methodically down the field. But when he is called upon, when he needs to put on that cape as Superman and run, he's going to do it, and he's also going to protect himself. The amount of times I see him see a defender, stop and like, okay, let me just slide here. Oh, let me step out of bounds, instead of what some other quarterbacks in the NFL do. Like, oh, let me just drop my shoulder into a linebacker. Like, no, you're the quarterback. You're 6'5". We need you for the playoffs. This Thursday night game. Did a good job of rushing, getting down, and then also Travis Etienne balling out in this game. And then the Jaguars, Saints came back. They're like, okay, that's fine. We're just going to drive the ball right down the field. Little out route here to Christian Kirk. Boom, we're off to the races. See you later. Good night, New Orleans, which was kind of a house of horrors for Trevor Lawrence, I believe, because he lost to LSU in the Superdome. So it's been a place where it's been a tough area of his career there. But overall, what were your thoughts on the game?
So Trevor Lawrence, I'd say his ankle is just fine. You mentioned his running ability, and I feel like him and Patrick Mahomes, as far as running abilities, kind of in the same conversation where nobody really talks about their running abilities when it matters. But at the same time, these are the same guys that can rip off a 20-yard run, not get hit, run out of bounds, and still move the chains. And I feel like that's something that him and Trevor don't really get enough credit for. I'd say his ankle was just fine in this game. He was dicing up the Saints D, which is no slouch of a defense by any means. Christian Kirk got involved. You saw Travis Etienne with 2 touchdowns, getting it done in the passing game as well. So offensive side of the ball, we had concerns beginning of the season with some of the turnovers that they were having. Looks like they're finally on page. A nice, slow but casual 31 points for them. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they were giving some trouble to Derek Carr. My takeaway with Derek Carr is, this is a guy that we'll get deeper into when we talk about it, but Derek Carr, all this noise in Oakland / Vegas with John Gruden, with Rich Bisaccia, with all the noise that comes around the Raiders organization. He leaves kind of in a weird way. Josh McDaniels kind of forces him out. Right. He joins the Saints. He joins all the talent with Chris Olave, Mike Thomas, Alvin Kamara, who had a great game today.
Yeah, he's back.
And just something about this offense, super clunky. Like, it shouldn't be, like, with the amount of talent that's on this Saints roster offensively, shouldn't be as clunky as it is. And there's just something there, and I think we can finally point to the guy, and I think it's Derek Carr that's holding the Saints team back.
Yeah, and it's Derek Carr holding the Saints team back for a few different reasons. One is because Derek Carr is definitely, I'll give him respect for being a gamer. He's a guy who's going to go out there, stand in the pocket, try and win you the game, and he's going to wear his heart on his sleeve, and that comes with its woes because there are a few times where Derek Carr was visibly upset on the field. Chris Olave didn't finish a route, and then Derek Carr had a meltdown. Tight end dropped a pass in the end zone. Derek Carr had a meltdown on the sideline. There were a few other miscommunications, and then Derek Carr goes into that press conference and he's like, hey, there was some emotions I wore on my sleeve, and that's something I gotta be better about. However, there were miscommunications that I was upset about, and I shouldn't do that in the future, but also none of it was my fault. And he kind of like blamed affected. It'd be fine if you're like, yeah, I made some mistakes. There were some mistakes made by some receivers that will go nameless, some mistakes by the offensive line and some miscommunications and errors there. However, I do have to take the blame because I am the quarterback. Maybe I could have thrown a better ball. Maybe I could have done something a little bit different in the huddle. So it's like with Derek Carr now, you're starting to see that teammates may or may not like him. There are some reports where Derek Carr is like, okay, well, if this guy's a dickhead, can't process information that fast, like that's a problem when you combine all of those factors. So, and I feel like if you polled Saints fans at this point, they'd rather have Taysom Hill as their quarterback than Derek Carr because they love him. And then everyone in the Saints was like, we're not in love with Derek Carr. And the thing is, they gave him $100 million. And like, if you look at the cap, this wasn't supposed to be, oh, a 1-year guy. Like, no, this was supposed to be a guy that's going to bridge the gap. And we're starting to see it with teams like the Indianapolis Colts, like the New Orleans Saints, the Colts before they got Richardson, at least, where it's like you have to go through this process where you're cycling through these kind of like bridge quarterbacks, and it doesn't really give you a direction. Starting to see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers probably go through the same process with Baker Mayfield, and then the Atlanta Falcons, where you're like good enough, but you're not quite bad enough, but you're not quite like elite.